is only a transition to a different sphere of consciousness. Carol Ann is not like those she's with. She is a living presence in their spiritual earthbound plane.
Hello and welcome to episode 48 of the Talking to the Dead podcast. This week we have quite a full program, and because it's so full I'm going to divide everything into two parts. The first part, just a quick review about some of the feedback from last week's episode. And the second part, I want to share with you some of the things that I've been reading about and feeling that indicate that things are going to happen, as has been discussed in the last 2 or 3 episodes now. But certainly at the moment, things are definitely moving in a certain direction. I'm not saying that I particularly look forward to it moving in this direction, but if it means that there's going to be some fantastic spiritual awakening, then I think it's probably quite good for us. But first of all, last week in my podcast, I put in Tucker Carlson, and I got a really good email from Mark. I'm not sure where Mark's from, but he was very upset about me including Tucker Carlson, because, as he said, Tucker Carlson is an extremely polarizing figure in this country, which I think it must be the United States, because he also is very depressed that there's a prospect Donald Trump might become president again, but I'm not here to do politics. But he also felt that me actually giving Tucker Carlson a platform, if you like, on my podcast was sending the wrong message, because in his view, Tucker Carlson is not a journalist, he's not credible, and he describes him as basically being a carnival act. Also, he corrected me that I must have said that he was talking about the chimps, the chimpanzees and Chimp Nation, or that program. And of course it wasn't. It was actually Joe Rogan who was talking about it. So I do apologize for getting my things wrong. Look, I don't know much about Tucker Carlson. He's not very well known in Germany or the United Kingdom for that matter. He's obviously very American-centric. And having a quick look at his Wikipedia page, as I did after Mark kindly wrote to me, I could certainly see where Mark is coming from, because clearly he is a very polarizing, very right-wing political commentator, or hack as I think he was called. And he does make quite incendiary claims. And if you believe the Wikipedia page, which does actually seem to be incredibly one-sided and negative about him, you would see that perhaps he's been caught lying in the past, which is not always a very good sign if you're trying to take something as fantastical as UAPs on board. But having said that, so far I do believe Joe Rogan is an interesting guy, and I did find Tucker Carlson a very interesting person. And I don't think it's fair to say because of a person's past necessarily he should be condemned forever. I certainly think that from other sources he's merely just reporting on them and confirming to me what I've heard in a lot of other areas and the books that I've read. So I think I'll believe what Titan says and what Daniel said when he came through, and also the books that I've been reading in the magazines. And I think it's certainly not the original stuff that came from Tucker Carlson. But again, apologies to Mark. I wouldn't want to give Tucker Carlson my 100% backing and credibility, because I don't know the man and I have no knowledge how honest he is or anything else. The second thing to happen during the week was I got communication from another listener, which I wanted to talk about, and she's allowed me to talk about it in quite a lot of detail, although obviously I will protect her anonymity. We will just call her A, and she kindly asked me, and she's a lady who has actually communicated with me quite a lot in the past. She asked me if by any chance I could actually try to get in touch with her deceased husband. Now, really, a lot of times I haven't really wanted to get involved in this type of thing. As regular listeners will know, I'm incredibly skeptical about mediumship and people who claim to be talking to dead people. Now, you could say, well, that's a bit hypocritical because that's the whole purpose of this show. But I think a couple of things are very important about me. I'm very skeptical because I do know there are an awful lot of charlatans out there. I've read books by James Randi, who spent his life trying to debunk false mediums. I'm very interested in what people think about this. And I think if you listen to Derren Brown, a very famous magician, he's done some very interesting things you can listen to on YouTube or watch on YouTube, where he's actually been interviewed by all sorts of people, including Richard Dawkins, who I personally like very much, who's an evolutionary biologist and a tremendous academic. And he's written many, many books, including The God Delusion and The Selfish Gene. And he's a very well-known and a skeptical guy. He calls himself an atheist. And these two have had a very interesting discussion where they actually talk about, as they reckon, the completely stupid fallacy that there is life after death, and that there could be communication or communion with entities and spirits in other dimensions. Look, it's up to you to watch. It's fascinating stuff. I have a great respect for these people. Who am I to say? I can only tell you that what happens to me, and what I feel, and I say what comes through. It's not me, although it could be a higher self, who knows? But I think it's very interesting that you have to be very skeptical about it, and you have to look out for the frauds and the cons. Now, I've obviously decided to be that way because generally I'm not here to be a medium. I'm not trying to offer my services to anyone. I have, on a couple of occasions this year, done that, but of course I'm not charging a penny. In fact, this podcast costs me money to produce because I have to pay a subscription every month for it, plus my time, which I enjoy doing. And that's a tremendous satisfaction to me. And the feedback I get from people really makes it all worthwhile, as you will hear in a few minutes when I tell you about the reading that I've done for A. Now, A sent me a note asking me, and she's very, very skeptical about mediums. I mentioned to her another medium that I'd come across called Alison Dubois, who I believe is the inspiration for that famous TV series called Medium. Look, I don't know who she is. I don't know how genuine she is, but it worries me greatly that if you do go to her website, I think she's so busy now, she doesn't do one-to-one meetings anymore, but she used to, and she'd invite you over to her wonderful mansion somewhere in the United States of America, and she would charge you, I think, upwards of $1,000 for that. I think she gets involved in doing it on Zoom, email, whatever you like, and you're talking about a person who I'm sure has gifts, but why do you need to charge hundreds and hundreds of dollars to be able to give somebody a reading? To me, it seems if you have that special ability, or gift if you want to call it that, you shouldn't be charging people, or at least you shouldn't be charging any more than the subscription it takes for the podcast. But I'm afraid that's not the way it works. And very early on in my podcast, I was warned by Titan about another medium. I never mentioned her name. And I think that particular lady has since been massively exposed as a complete fraud, who not only takes gifts from people, takes money from people, organizes international workshops. Clearly it's very dishonest if you're doing that. And I think it's really quite unpleasant if you're telling people things that are extremely personal about relatives who have died, or giving people sort of advice that you say is coming from a higher path. And it's not true. I mean, pretty sick. And I agree with Darren Brown on that. These people must be pretty sick if they feel that they want to make money that way. But I'm afraid there's a lot of it about. But I promise you, and I would say that, I am not that sort of person. I don't ask a penny. I'm delighted if any of my listeners would like to write in to me and ask me to contact people, and I'll do my very best. I have done it before, and as you know, it was reasonably successful. And I actually did it live on the podcast. But this time, I chose not to do it live because I felt it was these things are far too personal, and I would rather do it as a separate thing and send it to the person. And that's what I did with A. She wrote to me, could I contact him? She's been talking to him using a pendulum. I'll talk a little bit about that later. And was very eager if I could perhaps communicate with him to find out if it really was him on the other end of the pendulum. And would it be possible, he could try to suggest another way that communication could be made if it wasn't the best vehicle of communication. So, yes, a couple of weeks ago, I went and asked the chap if he would pop through, if he had anything to say to A or anything at all. It was as open as that, and I did my best. And rather than, as I said, playing the recording of that, I will just tell you what A's email response to me was. Because I think that really says it all. And she covers everything that I mentioned. Now, she says that I was 100% right in everything. Again, I think you have to be very skeptical of that because people, especially if you listen to Darren Brown talking about fake mediums, they most definitely would like to give you the impression that they've got a 100% hit rate because they conveniently move away from their misses and cover it up with their hits when they're talking to you. But I don't have anyone to talk to, which is another reason I think it's quite good what I do, because there's nobody in the room. It's just me and a microphone. So I have no ability to do what Darren Brown calls cold reading. That means I can't just look at your body language or sort of ask you questions or probe you in such a way and manipulate what you're saying into something that I will then reinterpret as being something that's coming from a higher place. I can't do any of that. All I can do is really pass it through as it comes. So again, I feel that's more genuine. I think that's cool. I don't also know much about the person or the people who are contacting me or people who are writing to me. I have no reason to do it, but I have no ability to, as a lot of mediums do, to sort of do Google and a lot of research in order to find as much as they can, and then sort of bamboozle the poor sitter into thinking that all this information is coming through them psychically. Again, I have no ability to do that. Now, I will be completely transparent here. A has been communicating with me for a while, and she has told me various things about her past husband. But this was all irrelevant to this reading because nothing I knew about him from what she said to me has come through, and I'm sure she would have pointed that out to me. I think she's honest enough to know if I was somehow not genuinely communicating with this chap. So this is what she wrote to me, and it goes like this. She said, "Thank you very much, and I wanted to write an email about my episode, and thank you very much for doing this for me. I know you don't usually do it, but it meant the world to me. Well done. You are right. He used to stroke my cheek, and it was one of the first things he used to show me he liked me when we were still just friends and we started dating. He was indeed a very gentle person, not very showy at all." And of course, that's what came through to me, this very strong image that he would use just one finger to stroke her cheek, that he was very gentle and he didn't like fuss and muss. He continues, a couple of weeks, something very unpleasant happened with the pendulum. I thought it was my husband, and I usually ask some validation questions, and he or she claimed to be him. But everything I received was so awful. The answers were so unkind, and the validation questions were wrong. And it lasted a couple of days, and I stopped using the pendulum because it made me feel miserable. I left it to rest for some time, and afterwards he was back again. And he told me that it was not him and that somebody else had invaded the channel. Now, after this email, I actually wrote back and I wanted to know a little bit more about this pendulum. I was aware that she uses a pendulum, and for those of you who don't know what a pendulum is, it's exactly what it says on the box. It's usually a chain, maybe a gold chain. It could be a string. It could be anything with a weight at the end. Or we could have a ring of somebody that you loved, or more of a psychometry type of thing if you want. And this thing can either spin clockwise or it can spin anti-clockwise when you hold it up just above the table. Sometimes they can move left or right. Whatever way that you choose is going to be the way that you know is yes and no. Up and down, yes and no. Left and right, yes and no. Clockwise, yes. Anti-clockwise, no. You get the idea. I'm not terribly sure how she's done it, but she got messages, as she wrote here, that clearly were not what she'd expected. And now I asked her what sort of rather unkind things came through, and very depressingly, the pendulum indicated to her that he didn't love her, or some very cruel things. Now, I obviously really do strongly advise anybody who's listening, and I have also with A, that whenever you use a pendulum, always do a protection ritual, as I do before I communicate with anything that's not of this world. Always be very, very careful who's coming through, and always make sure at the end of the session you thank the person who's come through and you ask them to go away, basically, goodbye. You've got to be very careful. Anything that is physical like that, such as a Ouija board or a pendulum, or to a certain extent tarot cards, palm reading, touching people, all these things invite a certain level of entity. Usually, as I've learned before, an entity that is very closely aligned to this earth plane. For that reason, it's been advised to me before by Titan that you've got to be very careful, because you might not be speaking to an entity that is not of this dimension at all. You could be talking to somebody who's asleep or just their subconscious. It's a very low frequency of radio wave, if you like, that's coming through. And like all things in life, they're nice people and they're unpleasant people. And if you're unlucky enough to have an unpleasant person who's able to somehow psychically connect to you, you're liable to get rather unpleasant stuff. If you're lucky enough to get a friendly, pleasant person, then hopefully you'll get nice, loving, kind things. Well, in her case, she obviously got something that was extremely unpleasant. I would reckon that what came through was not in another dimension at all. It was probably some really rather unpleasant, very miserable, sad person subconsciously connecting to her, and she tuned into it. But in the end, she did manage to, having had a rest, get in touch with her husband again, and he confirmed that it wasn't him indeed. It was somebody else who'd managed to invade the channel. And I know that since then she's managed to contact her husband, and he has confirmed that he was talking to me in my channeling of him, which was a recording that I made, which we're talking about now. So he most definitely has been involved in talking to me, and yes, warning about doing this type of thing with pendulums. So she continues in her email. She found it very funny that I used the word sarcastic to describe her husband, because he was very sarcastic. And she was very happy that communication would improve. And he has been telling me with the pendulum that. She's very sad and she's very frustrated obviously that her husband died, and that's something, of course, she finds very difficult to get over with. And I mentioned that I had this feeling that he came through and he talked about the last moments, last days, and the suffering, and he had, obviously, but he's having a much nicer time. And I was very positive with her. I tried to give her the encouragement that was coming through about where he is now, and a lot of very personal stuff I gave her. And she confirmed to me that all of this was pretty much true. I don't remember exactly, but he mentioned cars because he loved cars, and he did love cars, which probably is not so unusual with a lot of guys, but there we go. I mentioned also that he was making noises with his teeth, and she said that yes, he most definitely used to make a very characteristic noise while chewing his teeth, and while he was watching television or something, he would do that noise, and he said it did sometimes upset her, as I pointed out. And however, now she just longs to actually hear that noise and even imagines him making it. I mentioned that he wanted their daughter, to become a singer, and that was very important that he did that. And she wrote to me that yes, the daughter does enjoy singing and does want to become a singer, and hopefully that extraordinary stuff will come into their lives. She said I even sounded like him when I was relating what he was saying, which was lovely to hear. And apparently some of the words that I used were exactly the same words that he used many, many times. And it sort of, I think, probably gave her goosebumps to hear that. I mentioned that he wanted her to try to communicate in a different way other than a pendulum, maybe making cake or cookies or something. And she said, yes, indeed, yes. He particularly liked making particularly liked a particular type of chocolate cake. And she says that she's been helping her relatives to make this cake. And her brother-in-law, and her were trying to make this cake. Now, he mentioned too, if you make cake, don't forget the wine. And she said, of course, he was a wine lover. Bicycles came through, and sports shoes. Apparently he loved riding a bicycle outdoors. And he also, she also told me that yesterday she actually went out to buy a pair of Gore-Tex trekking shoes because hers are old and broken. She's determined to go walking again. And she hopes to be doing that more and more with her and her daughter. They have lots of nice walks, and it was always something that he loved doing. Going to beautiful places. And most definitely the gentleman came through, and he was very, very interested in all of that and getting out into nature and wanting her to do that more and more. He also mentioned that he wanted her to donate money, possibly to a cancer foundation. Now, she said that she actually used to do that, but stopped it because she got this letter from the place where she was sending the money to, and I think she was a bit annoyed by it. I suppose it sounded a bit like a begging letter, maybe. But she said she will start doing it again, but maybe to another organization more child-related, and that's, I believe, as he wanted. I mentioned a word, which was a word in her language. It didn't really ring a bell with her, so I consider that to be a miss. But later on, it started making sense because it was actually in her language for horse. And it turns out that her daughter once did do horse riding lessons, and her dead husband was very much recommending, I believe, that maybe she would start doing horse riding lessons again. So there was also the sense in that message that it was very important for her to move on in a certain extent, not necessarily to forget him, but not to be sad and not to cry, to really move on and be happy. Because everyone has the right to move on, and that would be the very last thing that I think he would want of her, is to be sad and alone for the rest of her life. Life goes on. And he kept on saying that in a way that, life goes on, and we need to hold on to that belief. So, yeah, that was pretty much the basis of what was coming through. And it was really, really lovely for me. And it's all the reward in the world for me to feel that when these things come through and I say them, they actually mean something to someone. And I think it helped her an awful lot. And then lastly, with the feedback, I also got a message from Mark again. And he actually had a really fascinating question. And he said that if someone died in 2024, would their spirit have the option of choosing a life in an earlier era? Or could they go back and live as a person in, say, the 1960s? Or is the past the past? If so, is there a concern about changing history? Or is that irrelevant? So, I think, in a way, Titan has mentioned these things before, so I can just tell you how I responded to that. And I think it's probably quite accurate. And I said, obviously, I can't be completely sure because I never listen to the episodes once I record them, so I may not be best placed to remember accurately what was said. So I'd recommend all listeners to go back and listen to the actual podcasts. But roughly I said, as I recall, that time is a construct and all time happens simultaneously. So moving backwards and forwards in our time is a perfectly normal thing for a multidimensional being to do when they're not in a physical body. I mentioned to Mark that Christopher Nolan's film Interstellar at the end really explains and shows this concept, which I think is definitely explainable in terms of physics and quantum mechanics, and has been demonstrated as being entirely possible. I have to be careful what I say because I'm not a quantum mechanic, but I believe Christopher Nolan didn't put anything into that film unless it was backed up by an eminent physicist who has said all of these things, including the effect of black holes and gravity, are all things that have been proven in our physical understanding. But in the Christopher Nolan film, at the end, you actually see the protagonist floating around in what looks like a multi-dimensional space, a sort of fifth or sixth dimensional space, where he can travel along timelines that are all the time that's ever happened in the particular history of his location where he was, in wherever it was, Kansas or wherever it was. And so he can see all the timelines, everything that had ever happened from the beginning of time to the end of time. And he has to, like a museum exhibit, he has to move along to try to find a particular moment in time when he can actually try to affect that moment in time from where he is and get the attention of his daughter. It'll all be very obvious to you when you actually see the film. And a number of these areas where he goes in time, it doesn't work. And eventually he does find a time where his daughter is obviously much older, and he does, through Morse code, strangely enough, manage to communicate and pass information to her, which is a kind of the whole purpose of the film in the end. But it's a wonderful image to see this guy floating around in a multi-dimensional space. You'd have to see it to believe it, how he managed to do that. Now, yes, I think this is how it's been explained to me by Titan as well. And as our choices that we make when we decide to reincarnate are that we can go to whatever time frame suits us and the learning that our souls need to achieve. And as far as this idea that I think was again made famous in Back to the Future, that if you go back in time and you change something, you potentially could seriously change the time going on thereafter. And obviously in that film, you could almost kill yourself by actually letting your mother die or something in the past, because she would have never been alive to have had you. All these rather strange science fiction film quandaries. But obviously, from what I've picked up from Titan in the past, I don't think that's possible, because every moment in time has its own particular direction, and it has its own potential future or possible future at the point that it happens. So, and all possible futures exist simultaneously. So everything that could have ever happened, given the fact that somebody had wanted things to happen, or a particular thing had happened, everything that would stem from that, every possibility, whether it was the thing that actually happened or what potentially could have happened, happens. And you can just, if you're in a multi-dimensional state, you can tune into those possibilities. But they're all completely, if you like, isolated and sealed. And you can't go to a particular time and then go in there and change it and then think it's going to affect another timeline. It's quite impossible. So, well, yeah, I hope that helped understand that fascinating question. So, really back to part 2 now, because I really wanted to keep going as I had in the last episode, because I believe that my podcast is best suited at the moment to giving you my observations and how I'm feeling about the quite shocking revelations that were made in an earlier podcast about the potential catastrophic future that we may be facing. And I want to keep examining that this week and maybe for a few more weeks until perhaps my podcasts move in another direction. But it will move in a direction as it should, usually without my choices. If you want to contact me and tell me how you're feeling or anything that's concerning you, tell me any of the signs that you are seeing as well, so I can mention them in the podcast. Please, I would really appreciate your feedback. And, you know, if you wish me to contact anybody who's passed, as long as it's someone that you know and you give me permission to do it, I'm very happy to do that for you. And obviously, I will mention it on my podcast if you give me permission to do so, as A did. I would never do it unless you didn't give me permission. So, and as you know, please, I don't charge any money or anything. It's just my time. And it's my passion, and this is what I feel that I was supposed to be doing this podcast for. So I am here for you. I'm very happy to help if I can. All you need to do is look at the email address at the bottom of the description of the podcast and contact me, and I'll try to help you as much as I can. So the things that I've really noticed this week, which seem to be indicating that something is really about to change in the world. The Middle Eastern conflict, I think everyone has been seeing that, and it's really ratcheting up to a sort of edge of catastrophe. I think when I did my last podcast, a bunch of pages had gone off with bombs in Lebanon, and I think it's been ascribed to the Israeli Defense Forces or Mossad. I'm not terribly sure if they have accepted responsibility, but I don't think there's a serious commentator out there who doesn't think it was them. And also, I believe some walkie-talkies were blowing up and killing a lot of what are called terrorists on the side of Hezbollah. And all the commentators are saying how this is bringing the conflict to a whole new level, and potentially it could spread worldwide. Now, I'm sure you probably have heard my episode earlier on the Middle East conflicts. I would go back to that if I were you, because I ended up contacting entities who are supervising, if you like, the way world events go. Can't explain it unless you listen to it. And they were very, very careful about warning way before all of this happened to the way it has happened about what potentially could happen. Obviously, at the point I did that podcast, Israel had started its activities in Gaza, but it was nowhere near as widespread and growing as it has happened in the last few weeks. So there we go. I think that's a real thing to watch. And where does this lead? Now, the biblical amongst you will say, well, this is what was prophesied, that it would all start in the Middle East. And a lot of people have said that if you believe in God, and if you believe in Jesus, and if you believe in the second coming and the end of days and the rapture, This is all the prophecies that are in the Bible, and I think probably other religious orders, are coming true. President Putin, well, I mean, he's never short of a threat or two. And in the last week since my podcast, he's been threatening to literally, I think he described it as the red button. The amount of rhetoric that's been going on about setting off a nuclear war are frightening. And there's been a lot of talk about him testing ballistic missiles, although I think one exploded on the launch pad. And people from Belarus are talking about it in terms of the weapons that they now have on their territory. There was even, I believe, a Russian television channel that showed, and I've seen it, it's on YouTube, a very vivid short documentary of exactly what London would look like if a nuclear weapon was detonated, airburst just above the Houses of Parliament. It's a shocking video. Once you've seen it, you can't unsee it. And it's been amazingly produced, and of course it's done complete as propaganda to terrify everyone about what's going to happen. And you can imagine the same above Cologne or Berlin or San Francisco, New York, any of the places that you guys are living in. And it is truly shocking just what one big nuclear bomb of the size that they have now, just as a normal weapon, would do. I mean, hundreds of thousands of people literally killed, and thousands, before their brains even registered that a bomb had gone off, would be vaporized, and hundreds more would die from the shock waves and the intense heat. And then as you spread out from ground zero to many kilometers beyond the initial impact radius, people die of everything you can imagine, including over a period of time, they end up dying of radiation poisoning. And these people also, if they are unfortunate to probably survive, will get killed by all the power stations and the oil refineries and all the other things that will simultaneously start exploding. Anyway, it's a truly frightening prospect, and it's there again if you wish to see it. I read that the rainforests in the Amazon are on fire, and apparently they have never been so much on fire before, and it's truly devastating. In the last week, there have been tremendous floods, most recently in Ishikawa, Japan. I think a number of people have been killed, but there have been, of course, massive floods, which are described as being once in a lifetime biblical proportions in Czechia and Poland. As I speak, this is going on right now. There was a devastating typhoon Yagi in Vietnam and Myanmar, Laos and Thailand. In the Philippines, there's a massive volcano about to blow at Mount Canlaon. There is another huge issue that's about to happen, I think, in New Zealand, and it's at Mount Ruafena, if I'm saying that right. Ruafea. It's about to erupt on the North Island of New Zealand, and they're saying that hundreds of thousands of people could be affected if this particular volcano goes. We've got problems in Hawaii. I think Kilauea, I think it's called, is about to blow as well. And extreme wildfires all over South America at the moment, massive amounts. There are deadly wildfires going on in Portugal. There are wildfires going on in California, in Peru, Nevada. And interestingly enough, after the Joe Rogan experience from last week, Donald Trump came out on the 21st of September saying that, yes, he didn't believe in aliens and UFOs and UAPs until once when he was president, a bunch of Air Force pilots were called into the White House and to sit in the Oval Office with him and explain what's going on. And I think it was probably in relation to the video that we talked about last week. And these really very credible pilots, all the top guns in their field, not the people who normally lie and jeopardize putting their careers into jeopardy by making up stories. Because, as I said, if you're a top pilot with nuclear weapons at your fingertips, you're going to be taken off active duty, and you're going to be flying desks, as they say, if you come out with this stuff. Because they'll think you're unhinged. But a number of these pilots have come out, and another pilot came out recently, actually, I think in the last week I saw that as well. But Donald Trump, who whatever you think of him, was sitting there, and he said this changed him forever, because these pilots recalled to him the things that they'd seen. And 3 or 4 of them there were in the Oval Office, and he says that the footage that we've seen so far just scratches the surface. Now, I've heard that also on, I think maybe the Joe Rogan show or somewhere else, that the government has been withholding crystal clear, ultra HD videos of UAPs and extraterrestrial life forms, all sorts of things. It's always funny how people say, why do we always get these grainy videos that you can hardly see? Considering that everyone has in their pocket, on their phone, a camera of such an amazing resolution. Everything should almost be cinematic and in Dolby stereo. But everything that seems to come through usually is so grainy, and it's so easy to assume it's been faked. And you can easily say it's not real. Well, that's because all the stuff that is out there is being withheld. And Donald Trump has promised that if he gets to be president again, he will insist that this footage that he's seen, that is not being released, is released. A megastorm has battered Britain in the last week. 1 month's worth of rain in a few hours. I've heard those stories before. But very much lately, the weather has turned tremendously dismal. And even sitting here in Cologne, Germany, I've hardly seen any sunshine for 2 weeks. It's been really oppressively dark and rainy and unpleasant. Yes, you could say, of course, it's late September. But actually, in my recollection of September and October in Germany, can often be extremely nice weather. And it's been uncharacteristically for me extremely damp and dark and miserable and very depressing. I've read a lot of information that's come to me about unidentified flying objects and nuclear weapons. It's been released in this last week, and not for the first time, I have to say, but people are talking about it, how for some reason UFOs have been seen regularly through history, certainly in the last 30, 40 years, outside very high, top secret nuclear facilities or naval or army bases. And it's been witnessed by, again, highly credible servicemen who've risked their reputations and their pensions to come out and talk about it. These UAPs have even managed to switch on, without the launch codes, all the nuclear weapons in one particular silo complex. And up till the very last minute before they launched, they were terrified that this was going to happen, but then they suddenly switched it off again. It was almost like a show of force that they have this ability to control the weapons. So, don't even try to use these weapons because we can influence them. It seems that UAPs are massively attracted to these nuclear sites. And I think I mentioned that in the past episode. But again, there's been a lot of talk about this. And apparently all this stuff is coming out more and more about how these UAPs, and if they're extraterrestrials or if they're time travelers or if they're people who are actually living amongst us and have always lived here, and have been here probably millions of years longer than we have been here and live side by side, they're coming more and more and being noticed for a reason. And I don't know what that reason is. And yes, a physicist in the last week I read in an Imminent magazine has claimed that multidimensional thought is actually what our consciousness is. Our consciousness, which some people believe is centered in what they call the pineal gland, which is in the center of the brain. I don't know, I'm not a doctor. But our consciousness, which is that elusive thing that Elon Musk and I'm sure people in China and scientists around the world are trying to manufacture artificially, but cannot. Consciousness is probably a multidimensional part of our human existence. It's the origin of all the things that makes us conscious. And a physicist has claimed that all we're doing is plugging into these multidimensions that make us conscious. You can read about that as well. It's all out there on the internet. So that's it really for this week. Esther, who very kindly did all the music for me in previous episodes, or I should say she played music from the ramblings that I was channeling from Neil Peart and other people who had been collaborating with him. She has kindly gone back to the very first episode where she had originally recorded what came through her as an interpretation of my channeling. She originally recorded it using her iPhone directly on top of a keyboard, and the quality wasn't very good. She's just come back today, and she's wonderfully recorded it through a direct link with her digital audio workstation and plugged it directly in, and now the quality is extremely good. And so I've decided it's so lovely, I'm going to use it as the end music for all my episodes. So I will say goodbye. Please write to me, and I mean it. Let me know what's going on. If you enjoy this episode and the direction things are going, you can help me a lot with it. Please correct me if you think I'm wrong. I have no objections to people telling me that if they think I'm barking, that's fine. I will tell you what, I will read it out. I think everyone's entitled to free speech. At the moment, this is very much me, Philip. This episode is probably the first episode that I've not contacted anybody from another dimension. But I'm here. I'm very happy to help. So thanks very much for listening, and I look forward to hearing you and speaking to you next week. And here is the wonderful Esther playing the proof of grief.